Hollywood is filled with stories of chance encounters, bold choices, and missed opportunities. But when it comes to Johnny Depp, the list of roles he turned down or lost at the very last second feels almost unbelievable. Imagine Jack Dawson in Titanic, played not by Leonardo DiCaprio, but by Johnny Depp. Picture Neo in The Matrix, dodging bullets in slow motion, not Keanu Reeves, but Depp in a leather trench coat. Or think of the smoldering vampire Louis in Interview, with the vampire roles that could have cemented his career in entirely different directions. Johnny Depp's career has always been defined by his unpredictable choices. He wasn't the typical Hollywood star who chased every blockbuster. Instead, he carved out a reputation for playing eccentric outsiders, from Edward Scissorhands to Captain Jack Sparrow. And yet, behind those quirky characters are a series of decisions, sometimes refusals, sometimes rejections, that shape not only his own destiny, but also the entire history of modern cinema. What if Johnny Depp had said yes to Titanic? Would Leonardo DiCaprio have ever become the global heartthrob we know today? What if Depp had been cast in Speed instead of Keanu Reeves? Would he have transformed into the ultimate 90s action hero? These are not just rumors. These were real opportunities placed in front of him. Opportunities he walked away from or lost. Tonight, we're opening the vault of what could have been. We're stepping into an alternate timeline of Hollywood, where Johnny Depp became the face of some of the biggest films of the last 40 years. This isn't just about movies, it's about fate, ambition, and the strange, fragile balance between success and regret. Because every star, no matter how bright, carries with them the shadow of the roles they didn't play. And for Johnny Depp, those shadows are larger than life. So, let's uncover them together. The films he almost starred in, the roles that slipped away, and how different Hollywood might look if he had taken a different path. This is the untold story of Johnny Depp's lost roles, the movies that might have changed everything. To understand why Johnny Depp turned down or lost so many iconic roles, we first have to look at the mindset that defined his career choices. From the very beginning, Depp was never interested in being a conventional Hollywood leading man. After his breakout in 21 Jump Street during the late 1980s, studios were eager to mold him into the next Tom Cruise or Mel Gibson, a safe, bankable heartthrob. But Depp rebelled against that mold. He despised the idea of being typecast as the good-looking action hero. Instead, Depp sought out roles that were unconventional, even bizarre. He collaborated with directors like John Waters on Cry Baby and Tim Burton on Edward Scissorhands. These films didn't just establish him as a star, they branded him as an outsider who thrived in the strange and surreal. By the early 1990s, Depp was Hollywood's most unpredictable leading man, an actor who refused to chase fame the easy way. And that is exactly why so many of those lost roles came to him. Casting directors and producers recognized Depp's talent and charisma. He was often shortlisted or even offered roles in major studio films. But time and time again, he walked away. Sometimes it was because he didn't like the script. Sometimes he feared being trapped in a formula. Other times, he lost the part simply because the studio wanted someone safer or more conventional. His choices created a paradox. On one hand, Depp built one of the most unique careers in Hollywood history, starring in films like Ed Wood, Donnie Brasco, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. These movies weren't box office juggernauts, but they cemented his reputation as an actor's actor, someone who valued art over fame. On the other hand, those same choices cost him opportunities to lead massive blockbusters, the kinds of movies that could have redefined his public image and secured his place among Hollywood's top earners. It wasn't until Pirates of the Caribbean in 2003 that Depp finally embraced a big studio franchise. And even then, he turned it into something strange, risky, and iconic. Captain Jack Sparrow was a gamble, a performance unlike anything Disney expected, yet it became the defining role of his career. Ironically, it showed the world what might have happened if Depp had accepted more mainstream parts earlier in his journey. By the time Pirates turned him into a household name, it was clear Depp's career could have looked drastically different if he had chosen differently in the 90s. And that's where our story begins, looking back at the most famous movies where Depp's name was in the mix, but fate, choice, or chance kept him away. The first missed opportunities came at a time when Johnny Depp was transitioning from television heartthrob to serious film actor. Casting directors knew he had the looks, the charisma, and the edge that could draw younger audiences. Two roles stand out as early what-ifs: Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Speed. Let's start with Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the iconic John Hughes comedy released in 1986. Depp was among the names considered for the role of Ferris, the mischievous teenager who skips school for an unforgettable day of freedom. Ultimately, Matthew Broderick won the part and turned it into one of the most beloved teen performances in film history. For Depp, the timing wasn't right. He was still finding his way as an actor, and his darker, moodier energy didn't quite fit the breezy tone Hughes wanted. But imagine if Depp had landed Ferris. His career might have launched into light-hearted comedies, forever shifting him away from the eccentric, brooding roles that defined him. Then came Speed in 1994, a high-octane action thriller that would turn Keanu Reeves into a global star. Depp was offered the chance to play Jack Traven, the LAPD officer forced to keep a bus above 50 miles per hour to prevent a deadly explosion. At that point, Depp was already a respected actor, with films like Edward Scissorhands and Benny and June under his belt. But he turned it down. Why? Because the script felt too straightforward, too much like a typical Hollywood blockbuster. Depp wasn't interested in being the next action hero. He wanted complexity, strangeness, and risk. By rejecting Speed, Depp walked away from one of the defining action films of the 90s. Keanu Reeves embraced the role, and it transformed him from a cult figure into a mainstream superstar. For Depp, it was another fork in the road. He could have been the face of 90s action cinema, headlining franchises filled with explosions and car chases. Instead, he leaned further into character-driven dramas and offbeat collaborations with auteurs. These two roles, Ferris, Bueller, and Speed, show us how early on Depp was already shaping his destiny. He consistently chose against the easy path, against the surefire hit, in favor of the strange unknown. But those decisions also meant that other actors stepped into the spotlight he left behind, rewriting Hollywood history in the process. And those were just the beginning. Because the next missed roles weren't just successful films, they became cultural phenomena, the kind of movies that defined generations. And for Johnny Depp, they were roles that could have changed everything. If Speed was a missed opportunity for action stardom, then the next two roles represented something even bigger: the chance to define entire eras of cinema. Both Titanic and Interview with the Vampire crossed Johnny Depp's path, and both times history took a very different turn. First, Titanic. James Cameron's 1997 epic is one of the most successful films ever made, turning Leonardo DiCaprio into the ultimate heartthrob of his generation. What most people don't realize is that Johnny Depp was approached for the role of Jack Dawson long before DiCaprio ever read the script. Depp reportedly thought Cameron's screenplay was too long and overly sentimental. He passed. The rest is history. Imagine, though, if Depp had been the one sketching Rose on the deck of the doomed ship. At 34, he would have brought a more rugged, slightly older energy to the role compared to DiCaprio's youthful innocence. The entire tone of Jack Dawson could have shifted from boyish dreamer to tortured artist, something much closer to Depp's signature style. Would the film still have broken box office records? Likely. But would it have turned into a teen phenomenon, with screaming fans plastering Jack's face on every bedroom wall? Probably not. By stepping aside, Depp indirectly allowed DiCaprio to become the global superstar he is today. Then there's Interview with the Vampire, the gothic adaptation of Anne Rice's best-selling novel. In the early 90s, Depp was offered the role of Louis, the brooding immortal who narrates the story of his centuries-long existence. But Depp hesitated. He found the script depressing and couldn't connect with the idea of playing a character consumed by eternal despair. The role went instead to Brad Pitt. That decision shaped two careers. For Pitt, Interview with the Vampire solidified his position as more than just a pretty face. It gave him credibility in darker, more serious roles. For Depp, passing on the film meant missing out on a chance to join a powerhouse cast that included Tom Cruise, Antonio Banderas, and Kirsten Dunst. Given Depp's natural affinity for gothic and eccentric roles, Louis might have been a perfect fit. It's almost ironic that he walked away. Together, these two missed roles illustrate the strange duality of Depp's career. On one side, he refused the mainstream romantic blockbuster that could have made him the biggest star on earth. On the other, he rejected a gothic drama that seemed tailor-made for his sensibilities. Each decision came from his instinct to stay true to himself, but in doing so, he left behind roles that became milestones for other actors. And yet, the most shocking what-ifs were still to come. Because the next films weren't just popular or successful, they became cultural revolutions, shaping the very identity of late 90s and early negative 2000s cinema. And yes, Johnny Depp could have been at the center of them. By the late 1990s, Johnny Depp had firmly established himself as Hollywood's eccentric outsider. Yet during that same period, two films came along that would redefine modern cinema, The Matrix and Fight Club. And both, at one point, had Johnny Depp's name attached. Let's begin with The Matrix. Released in 1999, the Wachowski siblings' sci-fi epic didn't just become a hit, it changed the very language of cinema. The bullet time shots, the leather coats, the philosophy about reality and illusion, it was revolutionary. When Warner Brothers began casting, the studio reportedly wanted A-list names like Will Smith or Brad Pitt, but the Wachowskis had a different vision. They listed Johnny Depp as their top choice for Neo, the computer hacker destined to become humanity's savior. Why Depp? Because he embodied that blend of vulnerability and rebellious cool. He could play a man lost in the system, searching for truth, yet capable of transformation into a warrior. But Warner Brothers hesitated. They didn't see Depp as bankable enough for such a risky project. Eventually, the role went to Keanu Reeves, and the rest became cinematic legend. Reeves' performance was career-defining, but imagine Depp stepping into that role. His Neo might have been darker, stranger, more tortured, a different kind of messiah. Would audiences have embraced it the same way? It's one of Hollywood's great unanswered questions. Then there's Fight Club. Directed by David Fincher and based on Chuck Palahniuk's novel, the film was a visceral critique of consumer culture and toxic masculinity. Depp was among the actors considered for the unnamed narrator, a role that eventually went to Edward Norton. While Brad Pitt stole the spotlight as Tyler Durden, Norton's narrator anchored the film with his weary, understated performance. For Depp, this could have been a perfect fit. The narrator's alienation, his sense of being lost in a soulless corporate world, mirrored themes Depp often explored in his work. He was in serious talks for the role, but the studio leaned toward Norton, believing he was a safer match for Fincher's vision. In hindsight, Depp's version might have been more manic, more surreal, pushing the film even deeper into nightmarish territory. But once again, it was an opportunity that slipped away. Both The Matrix and Fight Club weren't just films. They were cultural earthquakes. They defined an entire generation of moviegoers and remain two of the most quoted, dissected, and celebrated works of the late 20th century. Johnny Depp could have stood at the center of both revolutions, yet fate, studio politics, and his own reputation kept him on the sideline. Still, what's fascinating is how these missed roles didn't derail his career. Instead, Depp continued to carve out his path on his own terms. And soon enough, he would find his own revolution, a role so strange, so unexpected, that it finally propelled him into mainstream superstardom. But before we get there, we must ask, what did all these refusals and rejections truly cost him? By now, it's clear that Johnny Depp's lost roles weren't just small detours, they were massive turning points in film history. Each missed opportunity reshaped not only his career, but also the careers of other actors and the direction of Hollywood itself. The question is, what did these choices really cost him? And what did he gain by walking away? On the surface, the cost seems obvious. Depp could have been the romantic lead in Titanic, a role that turned Leonardo DiCaprio into a global phenomenon. He could have been the face of the new sci-fi generation with The Matrix, or the voice of a restless generation in Fight Club. These films made legends out of DiCaprio, Keanu Reeves, Brad Pitt, and Edward Norton. By stepping aside, Depp gave those actors career-defining moments that continue to define them decades later. But the gain is harder to measure and perhaps more fascinating. By refusing the easy path, Depp preserved his reputation as Hollywood's great outsider. Instead of being trapped in the heartthrob or action hero box, he continued to pursue offbeat, risky projects that allowed him to stretch his craft. Films like Donnie Brasco showed his ability to hold his own against Al Pacino. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas cemented his commitment to bizarre, fearless performances. Even Sleepy Hollow and Ed Wood revealed an actor more interested in art than stardom. Ironically, these missed roles created a paradox in his career. On one hand, they prevented him from reaching the same stratosphere of fame as some of his peers in the 90s. On the other, they built the mystique that would eventually make his Captain Jack Sparrow so shocking, so unforgettable. By the time Disney handed him Pirates of the Caribbean, audiences weren't expecting a standard swashbuckling hero, they were expecting Johnny Depp's unpredictability. And he delivered a performance so strange, so magnetic, it turned a simple adventure movie into a billion-dollar franchise. Still, there's no denying the alternate history. If Depp had taken Titanic, he might have become the world's most bankable romantic lead, but perhaps at the cost of his eccentric image. If he had played Neo in The Matrix, he might have become a sci-fi legend, but would he still have embraced Captain Jack Sparrow later? Or would his career have veered into a different kind of blockbuster territory? These questions linger like ghosts over his career. Ultimately, the impact of his missed roles reveals something essential about Johnny Depp. He was never chasing the spotlight. He was chasing characters, chasing challenges, chasing the weird corners of cinema. That refusal to play the obvious game is what made him so beloved and so frustrating to Hollywood. And it's why his lost roles are more than just trivia. They are windows into the choices that defined him. But as we near the end of this story, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. While many lost roles could have changed his path, there is one role he did accept, one gamble that transformed everything. And it may be the reason we're still talking about him today. In the end, Johnny Depp's career is defined as much by the roles he refused as by the ones he embraced. Every lost opportunity, whether it was Titanic, The Matrix, Fight Club, or Interview with the Vampire, paints a picture of an actor who was never driven purely by fame or money. Instead, he followed instinct, chasing characters that felt unusual, challenging, or deeply personal. This is why his story resonates so strongly. In Hollywood, where most actors desperately seek the biggest paycheck or the safest hit, Depp carved a path of resistance. His choices often frustrated studios, puzzled critics, and even confused audiences. But they also gave him an aura of authenticity. He wasn't playing the Hollywood game, he was rewriting it in his own strange way. And yet, the irony is inescapable. By rejecting mainstream stardom in the 90s, he delayed his inevitable superstardom until Pirates of the Caribbean in 2003. Captain Jack Sparrow was the ultimate contradiction, a massive studio role that he twisted into one of the most eccentric performances in blockbuster history. It was as if all the roles he had refused before had prepared him for that one, his chance to finally merge artistry with commercial dominance. Looking back, it's tempting to ask, what if? What if Depp had been Jack Dawson, Neo, or Louis the Vampire? Would his life and legacy look different? Perhaps. But maybe those missed roles were necessary. Maybe by walking away, he preserved the uniqueness that made him, for better or worse, Johnny Depp. Today, as Depp stands at 61, reflecting on a career filled with triumphs and scandals, lawsuits and comebacks, the legend of his lost roles continues to fascinate fans. They remind us that every career is shaped not just by what we say yes to, but also by the opportunities we leave behind. In those empty spaces, the true shape of a legacy emerges. Johnny Depp's lost roles aren't just missed chances, they're alternate universes, glimpses into what Hollywood could have been. And yet, perhaps the greatest role he ever played was himself, the rebel, the outsider, the artist who never let the world dictate who he should be. And that, in the end, may be the greatest story of all.